Alole methele mec. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to another segment here on Project Purpose. For those of you who are new, we cover topics that relate to mental health, mental wellness, and education on a week-by-week basis. And today's topic of discussion is mental health. And the conversation around mental health, I want to have a conversation around loss. And I wanted to have this conversation because it's too often a conversation that doesn't necessarily happen at home. So we can feel really destabilized, discombobulated when we're confronted with loss. Now, I think that there are 4 core types of loss that we're going to experience in this life, and I'm going to talk about all 4 of them and just give you a sense as to how to navigate these forms of loss if you experience them in your life, or if you're struggling through experiencing this kind of loss and grief in your life. And so of the 4 types of loss that we're going to experience, I like to frame them up front, and then we'll do a deep dive on each and every one of them. So the first one is loss by circumstance. And so this is typically when you're relocating, when you are moving from one life milestone to another. Like, I think loss of circumstance happened quite a bit when we were cycled through school. If someone moved a lot in their primary and in their secondary years, I did move a lot in my primary years. This loss by circumstance can be very discombobulating. It can impact our ability to bond and attach with people as well. And the second one is loss by betrayal. And so this is the one where the relationship, the dynamic changes because of new information, and that can be really stressful. So loss by betrayal can be a friendship, it can be a relationship, it could be a loved one. I mean, this one's a really tough one to get through, but also one that we're all going to have to learn how to manage through in life. And it can be very informative and very insightful when we frame it and frame ourselves by way of how we self-preserve when we experience loss from betrayal in our lives. And there's also just loss by way of just growth and development, just life happening. So I would call that still loss by circumstance. And then the last one is loss by death. So experiencing a death in your life. So we're going to experience these forms of losses. They're going to impact our view on life, and they're going to also impact how we position ourselves in relationships so that we safeguard ourselves from the impact and the weight of these losses. And so the first loss that I experienced, as I've mentioned earlier, is loss by circumstance. My parents were fairly nomadic in my primary years. They moved quite a bit, and it had an impact on me. And I don't think they recognized how much of an impact it had on me until high school, because by high school, they were fairly stable. They had bought and built our home. I had grown up from high school onward in Port of Newcastle. And so at that point, they stopped moving, but then my friends would tell them, well, Rochelle rotates with different friends, like every year and a half or so. Like every year and a half, Rochelle hangs out with different people, from this one friend that I had since in the 3rd grade. And so when I think about loss by circumstance, like my parents moved quite a bit, and I was in the 3rd grade, and I was always a year younger than everyone. In my primary school, I started early, and I remember in grade 3 and grade 4, I went to school in Bowmanville. That was the first place that we moved to when I moved from Alberta, which is where I was born, to Ontario. And so I had made this one friend. She was my best friend, and my parents liked this friend enough that even when they moved me out of that area because they decided that they wanted to homeschool me, when they decided to start their own business, they ran their own nursing home, they allowed me to keep this one friendship, right? But outside of that one friendship, every time they moved, like, I had to start again. Like, I had to rebuild my friend base again. It was a very emotionally taxing experience because I was someone who loved my friends very deeply, and it was just hard to have that ripped from me, knowing that that wasn't something that I was going to be able to go back to for the most part, especially if you're like moving cross country. It's almost impossible to maintain connections, and we didn't have iPads and technology back then to help make that an easier transition. And so my first form of loss was loss by circumstance, and my parents realized that I was adversely impacted by it only when they had spoken to this one friend that I had since I had moved to Ontario, who told them that in high school that I would rotate. Like, I would find myself every year and a half or so with a different friend group. They're like, no, Rochelle, like, there's no reason for you to like feel as though you have to change your friendships every year and a half or so. And I think this even impacted me in my career because it followed almost the same cadence. Like, as frequently as my parents had moved in primary school, like every 1.5 or 2 years or so, I found myself following that same pattern until I had to really be conscious about breaking it, recognizing that it was a self-preserving mechanism. I want to maintain that cycle so that I didn't form attachments that were so deep that it was very debilitating when those attachments were pulled away from me. So loss by circumstance, I think, is one that we need to be really mindful of, especially if we're raising children, because it can be very difficult to understand why this loss is happening to us when we don't really understand the circumstances the factors. It's not like my parents sat me down and explained like why this move was good for the family, nor were they very elaborate in giving me the opportunity to say my goodbyes. Like I didn't get a lot of closure. Like it felt very abrupt in each and every situation. I think that really did have an impact on my ability to form attachments. So definitely something that I've worked on, that I've recognized like had a big impact on me in my adulthood, and something that I've had to address. But I think all of us are going to experience loss by circumstance, even if you weren't from a nomadic family that moved every couple of years. Like life milestones will force circumstances on you that will create rifts in your friendships and rifts in the people that you're connected to. And I am a firm believer that like you want to pursue growth in life. Like you don't want to necessarily like be with the same people that you grew up with your entire life without also expanding that circle to meet new people. And I think that if I didn't have this basis where I felt the need to find new community and create new relationships and seek out connections, I wouldn't have had the bravery or maybe even the desire to move abroad and to experience different cultures and to experience different people. Like I am someone who actively pursues that because there's still something very like invigorating about the novelty of a new connection and how good it feels to connect with someone on a deeper level. And so I would seek out those connections. I would find them, of course, but then circumstances, sometimes those circumstances were intentionally brought on. Like I brought on a circumstance that would like create rifts. And now I've reached a stage in my life where I want stability, where I don't want circumstance to necessarily be what introduces loss in my life. But I recognize that circumstantial loss has been a huge player in my life, and I had to really be intentional about repairing some of the damage that circumstantial loss can create. And again, like this can be because like your parents, like my parents, might have been nomadic and weren't really intentional about giving you the closure that you needed when you had to say goodbye to new friendships. It could be as a result of transitioning, right? So even when we transition, even the transition between, you know, primary school to middle school to secondary school, and the transition to university, and even like in my university, I was almost kind of set apart because after my second year, as I had mentioned in my previous video, I started working full time, and it put me in a completely different, I think, life stage almost immediately than my peers, because I was working like a full-time job, full-time, accommodating my school schedule, but it meant like I didn't party with my friends. I didn't have a social life, right? Like it was really me doing my studies, going to work, and then spending time with my partner at the time. Like it was, I felt like I was living an adult life quite young, which is probably why when I did my master's program, my MBA program, I wanted the full immersive student experience, and I really leaned into it because I didn't give myself that experience in university. And so I had felt the loss of not allowing myself the experience that my peers had in university because I wanted to do university my own way. My parents had wanted me to live in Port of Newcastle and commute into Toronto to go to school, and I just wanted to live in Toronto. But that meant I had to fund my own life because they were not going to pay for me to live in a city that they didn't approve of me being in. And I'm so happy that I made that choice because I was able to pay for my post-secondary education. I had that level of autonomy as well. And I had already made inroads in my career. Like by the time I graduated, I had 4 years of work experience under my belt. Not a lot of people have that, right? And that was definitely an advantage in my career because I've experienced multiple career transitions because of that specific loss, that circumstantial loss. So circumstantial loss is like one of those blessing and a hardship of sorts. But I think that if you can really wrap your head around how you benefit or how you can be intentional about circumstantial loss that doesn't impact your ability to attach to people, I think that that is something that life and you will have to find a way to make middle grounds on. You have to find middle grounds for that kind of loss. Now, the second kind of loss is loss through betrayal. And so this one is not one that I experienced a whole heck of a lot until around like my mid to late 20s. I think it was roughly around my master's in business administration. I have to tell you, I did not think that people's perceptions of me was going to change so drastically because I went to their MBA program at University of Toronto. I think that even when I started to prepare myself and I started to position myself to go to that school, it introduced a little bit of loss by betrayal. And I think that that was because a lot of my people, the people that I was friends with at the time, felt threatened by that ambition. And when I actually achieved that ambition, it just changed how people interacted with me. And it became even worse. It became even worse. Like when I finished my MBA and I was working abroad and I came back, I recognized like the reason why I think that it had such an adverse impact on my relationships is because no one actually thought that I could do it. People underestimate me quite a bit. And then I think it's very hard for them to, I guess, build a bridge back when they recognize that they were wrong. I mean, I don't know, I can't speak for them, but I experienced a huge shift in dynamic across multiple people outside of the MBA community and even within the MBA community when I started to accomplish things that they thought were outside of my reach. And that was what introduced this loss by betrayal. And I don't think it's always like necessarily driven by envy. I think it can be driven by a lot of different things. But loss by betrayal for me was extremely difficult to calibrate. I had a hard time seeing people that I had built close relationships with differently because of just the situations that had played out. And some of this betrayal, I mean, I had mentioned that I had been stalked a few times. So having first someone who I knew, who I had been close with, start to stalk me, and not even just them. Like I had mentioned that I had my mother who I had broken ties with, and that became a very hostile, very toxic situation that I was creating distance from. Then it was my mentor who I now recognize I needed to create distance from. And then it was those two people that I had mentioned. So one of them was in my MBA program and his wife that I now needed to create distance from, who had visited me in Paris. And I think some of that came with me building Project Purpose. I didn't talk about it a lot, to be honest. I didn't talk about Project Purpose being a big thing, a passion project of mine, until I put the website up. And then I think that just completely like rocked my community. And I think most people were proud of me, but then a lot of people now saw me as someone that they wanted to control, that they wanted to manipulate, that they wanted to align with, but in the most coercive and toxic and intimidating ways, right? And I don't think I've ever experienced, I've never been the person that people felt inclined to do that with. And because I'm a kind person, I think people think I'm a naive person. Like they don't think that I know like what's happening behind the scenes. But it introduced waves of loss by betrayal. And so I think loss by betrayal is very much a bitter pill to swallow, but it gives you discernment. And I am so proud of how I've been able to cultivate this sense of discernment, because now I can really be very clear on what's a betrayal and what isn't. Because a lot of things can happen with people that you care about who are in your circle that might appear as betrayal, and it's not. And I can discern those specific things just based on time and experience with people. And I think that when you spend enough time with people, and in that time you recognize all of the opportunities those people have had to cut you down, to betray you, to cut you out, and they have not done that, when a circumstance comes up where you feel like, oh my gosh, this is what's happening, but then you think to yourself, it has to be deeper, there has to be more layers to it, because this isn't the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth time that this person has had the opportunity to do this, where they didn't take that opportunity. And now sometimes like it is someone taking that opportunity for sure, but I've recognized through cultivating this discernment what betrayals are actual betrayals and what betrayals are just miscommunication, misunderstanding, being misinformed. And I treat them very separately. I'm not going to be angry, upset, or feel spiteful if it is the case that I recognize that like I was duped, people were duped, people were misinformed, and as a result of that, like there was this thing that came up, like we can resettle that. I'm not going to disrupt my circle because of misinformation. But loss by betrayal teaches you discernment, and when I say discernment, it gives you good judgment about who you let close to you and who you don't. So while it is a bitter pill, it is hard to stomach, it is the thing that will show you how you protect your peace and protect yourself from people who have very bad intentions. You need to experience betrayal to understand how negative intentions and motivations look and feel and translate, and it becomes a pattern. Like most people who approach you with negative intentions follow the same, they have the same kind of energy, even if it translates differently because of personality. There's an energy about how people engage with you where you can tell. Well, what happens is you don't take it personally. You can create what I call objectivity of care, which is that like you can have the cordial platonic discussions recognizing that that person is a threat. Like I can have a conversation with someone that I see as a threat because of the energy they bring into every conversation, and still be diplomatic, still be polite, still be cordial, still be professional, because I've experienced enough loss by betrayal that it doesn't discombobulate me or destabilize me. Like I can maneuver through it eyes wide open. Now the last kind of loss that is really difficult, and it was very hard, even now, like I do not have, I think, the best relationship with death, but loss by death is a difficult dynamic. We're all going to experience it at some point in our life, but like for me, I think death was first introduced to me in a very messy way. My parents, again, I had mentioned, owned a nursing home. I was homeschooled at the time, so there was this one woman who I would put puppet shows on for her with my little Barbies, and I had done the same thing. I had put a puppet show on for her, but she had passed, and I just had no idea. And so, I mean, at some point, like I recognized that she wasn't responsive, and I called an adult, and it became like this chaotic chaotic situation, but no one took the time to sit down with me to explain to me like what had happened, right? It was like she wasn't responsive. A lot of freaking out took place. The ambulance ended up coming, and they took her away, and I was just kind of in the corner, like shocked by the whole experience. And then that was when I was quite young. I was still in my primary years when that took place, and my next two experiences with death were in high school. And so because I lived in the country, drinking and driving was a big deal with our student population. It was probably one of the big reasons why my parents did not let me go out at all. Like I was on a very, very tight leash. But because there's not like a huge like transport infrastructure, it's very hard to get back home if you don't have a ride organized. And so I had a friend who was drinking and driving and who had a horrible car accident. And it was a really unfortunate situation because I think the adults at the time wanted to make an example to scare us all from ever engaging in that behavior. And so they decided to make it an open casket when it absolutely should not have been an open casket. Like nothing could have made that scene look natural. It did not look good. And especially because a lot of family flying in for her funeral as well found out that she had passed away before it was like a week and a half, 2 weeks before her funeral took place. And then they decided that it was an open casket, and she like hit the windshield but didn't go completely through. So just think about the impact. And then they decided to like cover that with makeup. So that was incredibly traumatizing and jarring. And since then, like I cannot step foot in the same room as a coffin. I can be like in the lobby, I can be in the parking lot, but I cannot be in the same room as a coffin because of how jarring that was. And so I respect death and I give myself closure from a distance, but I know that a lot of people feel that you need to like see the coffin go into the ground to find closure. And like for me, absolutely not. That's been a very traumatic, jarring experience for me. And I think that what I would like to do, like for my children, is really have a clear cut discussion around death, around the practices and rituals that people can sometimes engage in when it comes to death, but never allow death to be something that traumatizes them, because I don't think that that's a trauma that I'm going to shake. Like I think I'm always going to have the same orientation around death now. Like it's something that grew. I think it started with that first experience when my parents were in the nursing home, and then with the friend who had passed on in high school. Like from then, our relationship with death has pretty much solidified. I don't think it's the best, but I think that like I understand that death is necessary, that it happens. But I don't follow the traditional rituals around death. Like I'm not someone who participates in funerals. I'm not someone who can be in the same room as a coffin. It's not something that's going to happen because of my experiences with it. So I think that we should be very mindful, very careful with how we introduce death to children. I think that a lot of my, I guess, quirks around it was because of it was very poorly introduced and poorly managed for me as a child. So it's something like as an adult, like I can in hindsight recognize like what went wrong, but there's like behavioral fear that is still quite rooted in how I respond to it like as an adult. In any case, like I think all of these forms of loss or losses that we're going to experience in life, I think that they're important that we cultivate like a healthy dynamic around these forms of loss, recognize the value that we can derive from these kinds of losses as well. So that's what I wanted to talk about. I think that we don't really talk about loss a lot. We don't talk about grief a lot, how we manage through it, and giving ourselves time and space to like push through it. And like you can't put a timeline to grief. You can't put a timeline to loss. It will take the time that it needs to take if you focus on just honoring your emotions, feeling the feelings that you need to feel, recognizing that there's going to be a date where you just don't feel those feelings, but you retain the lesson. In any case, that's a topic that I had. If you want to have discussions around self-mastery or how to cultivate the skills, and I do believe that they're skills, life skills, that gives you the ability to find fulfillment and meaning in life, we do provide adult programs that focus on development, growth, clarity, focus, so that you can really be intentional about how you live your life on a day-to-day basis. And we also have parent-child workshops. We do offer parent-child workshops that focus on cultivating leadership potential in children. We provide 4 core modules focusing on autonomy, self-efficacy, compassion, and self-concept. We are offering a free workshop on self-concept starting Sunday, February 1st, and it's going to go on for the full month of February. So if you want to have a teaser as to how these workshops are run, then I do strongly suggest that you participate, that you register to join in. And I'm really very excited. I'm very excited for all of you to be part of the journey, the Project Purpose journey. And again, like if you're still here, please do follow us, leave us a like, give us a comment down below, like by way of your experience with loss, whether it's loss by circumstance, loss by betrayal, or loss by death, and how you're finding your way into creating a healthy dynamic with loss, because it's part of life, but how we manage ourselves around it is going to be the game changer in us having a healthy and adaptive bounce back from that loss. In any case, thank you again so much, and I'll talk to you all very soon.